China is set to invest $3 billion in Blackstone, but now one senator says he's worried that investment is a threat to national security, and he's asking the SEC to delay Blackstone's IPO. Is China's investment in Blackstone a national security threat? Alan Tonelson is a research fellow at the U.S. Business and Industry Council, and Nariman Baravesh is chief economist at Global Insight. Gentlemen, good to see you. Yeah. Alan, what do you think? Senator Webb says Blackstone invests in military and satellite technology. He's worried that now the Chinese will be able to get a hold of that technology. Does that worry you?
It worries me tremendously, but also the future implications of China's partnership with Blackstone deserve much greater scrutiny than they've had so far, because we have to remember Blackstone's Chinese partner is not a Chinese private company, which is a pretty controversial concept to start with, but leave that aside. It's the Chinese government. The Bush administration's Defense Department has just once again reminded us that China is a major and growing national security problem for the United States. So I would hope that President Bush's Treasury Department and his own chairman of the SEC would be similarly sensitive to national security concerns. And we also have to remember that from now on, every time Blackstone looks at a U.S. technology company, that means the Chinese government is looking at that same technology company and getting the same proprietary information.
Nariman, should the SEC listen to Senator Webb and delay the IPO?
This is a tempest in a teacup. Remember, 20 years ago, we worried about the exact same thing with the Japanese. Didn't happen. We were worried about them taking our technology. We were worrying about them being a threat to our national security. Didn't happen. This is really one of those very silly worries. Remember also, $3 billion is a drop in the bucket. So,
well, what about their ability? Do you think that Alan's right, that they'll be able to see military and satellite technology?
As investors, I doubt it very much. There's all kinds of controls and stuff on companies and their technology that investors don't get to see. Why would the Chinese get to see it?
Alan, he raises an interesting point here. I mean, what you're essentially saying is that the Blackstone people cannot be trusted to keep that information out of the Chinese hands.
The Blackstone people are not responsible for U.S. national security, and what we just heard of about national security controls and stuff have been rendered largely threadbare because nobody in Washington is minding the store. Thank goodness Senator Webb is doing his job. It's time for the Bush administration, whose own Defense Department, which may be silly, as we've just heard, but maybe it's not silly. Maybe the Defense Department knows something about national security and has a realistic long-term outlook.
Nariman?
We don't want the Chinese government getting U.S. national security secrets. That shouldn't even be controversial.
National security is the last refuge of protectionists. This is a very silly argument. We have never been under threat from the Japanese. We've never been under threat from the Chinese.
That argument is the last refuge of someone who has no concern about national security.
Not at all.
What's the rush?
Not at all.
What's the rush?
Not at all.
Tell me what the rush is.
Why wouldn't we want other countries, other companies, other nations to invest in us?
China is not an ordinary other country. China
we said that about Japan.
We never called China a totalitarian state that was a military threat. Japan was a military ally. You have to know your history. You can't keep on spouting this nonsense.
This is absolute nonsense. What you're creating
Japan
is a
was an ally.
China's
been identified as a military threat.
No, it has.
You're just blowing smoke.
$3 billion in a hedge fund that invests in some defense industries is not a national security threat.
$200 billion sovereign equity fund that China will be investing all over the world. This won't be the first amount of money that China invests in the U.S. economy. So let's start thinking about this before the problem spins out of control and not after the fact.
20 years ago, Japan was a designated bad guy.
Japan is
now
not
it's
China. Japan is
not
Alan,
China. But Alan, do you see Nariman's point that at the time, I'm sure if you pulled out newscasts from back then, we'd be worrying about the Japanese bought Rockefeller Center, the Japanese bought Pebble Beach. What is this? But people were worried about the Japanese taking over the United States.
Of course, but Japan was never designated by the U.S. government.
And it wasn't true is the point, though.
Well, Japan was never designated by the U.S. Defense Department as a large and growing potential U.S. national security threat. China has been. That puts it in a completely different category, and someone who doesn't see it, frankly, isn't qualified to comment on these issues.
Let me remind you, in the 1984 presidential debate, Walter Mondale stood in a U.S. auto company on the shop floor, and essentially said,
"This is a ridiculous analogy. China is not Japan."
Hear me out. In 20 years' time, he said,
I already know what you're going to say.
All the U.S. people will be good for sweeping the floors of these of Japanese car factories. It didn't happen. It's exactly the same kind of xenophobic fear that we've got
We
here.
are not talking about a purely economic issue. We are talking about a national security issue which Japan was never identified as presenting by the U.S. government. This is a completely different situation.
No, it's not.
These analogies are nonsense.
No, a lot of people were worried that the Japanese were going to buy into U.S. military technology in the 1980s.
The
Same
Defense
concerns.
Department was not.
Well, that's not true.
End of story.
Everybody
of course
was.
It's true. Everybody, the Defense Department never designated Japan as
There are
a
a lot of
potential
generals
problem.
out there talking about it. There are a lot of military.
Could you identify one, please?
Sure.
Please, do it.
Well, you know, we'll save that for another day, guys.
Okay, I guess we
Alan
have to.
Tonelson and Nariman Baravich on a story that I'm sure is going to be continuing day after day here. Mark?
All right. It's a big question, and the Bulls want some answers, Michelle.
Yep, after coming down from the 5-year high set last week, have bond yields peaked, or are they poised to hit the 6% level? Both the chief investment strategist and bond strategist weigh in on that question next. You're watching Morning Call here on CNBC. We are America's business channel.